Yo, what's up, people? During this whole pandemic in the world going crazy right now, I took a moment to look back towards the older Final Fantasy games, specifically my favorite, Final Fantasy 5. If you are a person that plays 14, then you probably don't even know that there's a lot, and I mean a lot of stuff from 5 that's in the game. So I kind of want to make a series to show that, because a lot of people haven't played 5. Our Final Fantasy 3 was Final Fantasy 6. We didn't get 5 until sometime after. So this is kind of new for a lot of people here. And, and for a little bit of a background on 5, you just play as a guy named Bart, or as I like to call him, Buds. Main character, he's an adventurer with just him and his chocobo. And he gets pulled into this huge adventure, all thanks to the crystals. Final Fantasy V had a very strong job system. It was the first game to introduce Blue Mage, which is by far my favorite job in Final Fantasy lore. And it was just an overall good game, good story, nice developments, and very colorful, and really gives you a sense of what Final Fantasy really is. Just an adventure game where you meet interesting characters and you come together to basically fight against evil. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but when things do get serious, it knows when to kind of focus up. So this will be a part of a series. So I hope you enjoy this, and yeah, let's have some fun with this. The first location I want to talk about in regards to Final Fantasy V would definitely be the Library of the Ancients. The Library of the Ancients is a sacred place that holds all the knowledge of the world in Final Fantasy V, but you could say the archives are incomplete. When we come here, we're looking for a boy named Mid, who is the grandson of Cid, Cid being usually a staple to the Final Fantasy series in terms of being a creator, a pilot, whichever. Mid is here looking for a book that will help power ships without the need of the fire crystal, as the fire crystal is being overworked and soon enough becomes destroyed. The thing about the ancient library is all the enemies here are the books themselves. The tomes in the basement have been possessed and are now attacking people without reason. Our mission is to go into the basement of this library and rescue Mid, who has gone missing. Not an easy task, as not only do we have to go through the books, but we also have to go through Ifrit himself down here as well, who is trying to test our strength to see if we are worthy of his power. Taking a break from 5, let's look at the library in Final Fantasy XIV. The library in 14 kind of serves a similar purpose in terms of getting information. The same as 5, all the tomes have been possessed. After going back and playing through 5 and playing through 14 again, I start to notice that there are a lot of enemies that have similar appearances, movesets. Hell, they're the same enemy, just recreated in 14. So what's neat is you can see these 2D enemies in a 3D painting now. A lot of the enemies here and the bosses you could find in 5. These include Biblios and a Panda. A neat tidbit to add is that Blue Mage learns an ability from here called Level 5 Death. Not only do you learn that from an enemy here in Final Fantasy V, but you also learn that from the same enemy in Final Fantasy XIV. So I think that's a nice tie-in to show you that the developers really looked back at Final Fantasy V when crafting the Gubal library in Final Fantasy XIV. this isn't the only time you go to this library in 14. If you're a summoner, you go back to this library to learn how to harness the power of the Dreadworm, which is basically Bahamut. This calls for us to have to go to the library, go to the basement, fight through all the evil tomes, and find this specific tome that will give us the information that we need. It's a really nice tie-in, and it really shows you that this library has all the information that you really need in the world. Even though this was kind of used just to spark that fight within you to unlock the Dreadworm stance, and that the tome really wasn't there. The first comparison boss I want to look at in terms of these two locations would be Biblios. You fight him as a boss in 5, you fight him as a boss in 14. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through both of these fights. We're going to see if they have any similar mechanics or any similar movesets and kind of break it down from there. In Final Fantasy V, once you get to the very bottom of the basement, you find Mid reading books. And you think that everything is fine, but in reality, this is the boss fight. Now, Biblios in this fight is kind of weird. He does do some moves that you don't see in 14, such as Web, which will slow that party member down. It's basically a slow. He'll also protect himself from physical attacks, and it really pushes you to try to use more magic. Earlier in this dungeon, you actually unlock Ifrit once you defeat him to be able to use Hellfire. And all the pages in here, being books, are weak to fire attacks, which makes this fight very, very easy. Now, Biblios in himself, his pattern is kind of weird. He'll try to confuse you, he'll slow you, a lot of different status effects really that don't really amount to anything if you're wearing gear that, nulls it, And if you have a summoner in a party, well, you're just basically burning him the whole time until he's dead. My experience with him was pretty simple, though sometimes he would use an attack that hit really hard, almost one-shot Bart's a few times. But if you use flame attacks, he's nothing special. He'll try to drain your HP sometimes to stay in there a little bit longer, but the amount of damage that you're doing, if you're using fire attacks, the fight itself doesn't really last that long. And another interesting tidbit is, once you get to this point, you have Ifrit, and more than likely you've been using Hellfire against him. He'll make a mention of you using Ifrit and basically peace out, aka die, because of it. And that's because all the tomes in this dungeon fear Ifrit because he was used as the book burning device in the olden days. Once defeating Biblios, you find Mid, who had no idea that you guys were just fighting a boss fight behind him. I guess the boss music wasn't loud enough for him to hear, but the funny thing is that none of the possessed tomes attacked him, and he gives you an easy way out of the dungeon with a shortcut. Now we're going to jump to 14. Biblio in Final Fantasy XIV is the second boss of the normal version of the Gubal library. Just like his counterpart in 5, he appears within the pages of a book. Now, obviously, there's big combat differences between the two games, where Final Fantasy XIV is more active, and you only control one person while you control all 4. But there's some similarities, where Biblio used Protect in 5, in 14, instead, he erects a barrier around himself that makes him impervious to any damage. The only way for you to really get damage on him is if you lead these magical orbs, in this case, into him to knock him out of that barrier. It's kind of similar to where physical attacks were weaker, but magic attacks in 5 were the go-to method of damage. And he'll do his basic telegraph attacks, but he also has a move where he'll specifically target one player and charge into them, looking to give them heavy damage. And it kind of reminds me of the move he does in 5, where he will target a single player and hit them with a tremendous amount of damage almost randomly. During the fight, he'll also put out these greenish orbs, which are kind of like barriers that will absorb the magical orbs that are used to knock him from the book and the pages. These orbs are the only way of giving them any damage at this point. So when they're destroyed, well, you won't be hitting him at all. But just like his counterpart in 5, he's an easy fight, an easy beat. I don't think they're really created to be anything more than that. Now going back to 5, we're going to focus on a Panda. The different thing here is that this technically isn't the Library of the Ancients, but it's a piece of the library that was brought into the void. A Panda is actually one of X-Death's minions who attempts to stop you from proceeding within the interdimensional rift later in the game. Now, if you think that a Panda is anything special, then I hate to break it to you, but he's basically a color palette of Biblios, and they use a lot of the same moves. He's actually pretty disheartening to find out that this is just a boss that was reused, but with stronger moves. And to make things even more interesting, if you bring a summoner into this fight and use Ifrit, a Panda will be scared and turn his back to the party, giving you free reign to attack him even more. The fight itself is even easier than Biblio's, because at least Biblios didn't turn away from you when you used Ifrit, but a Panda will. Now, there's new status elements he'll use, like Toad, which can be healed with a Suna or a Maiden's Kiss, and he'll use Slow, and he'll also protect himself still. But the fight in itself, with fire attack still being his weakness, and also Ifrit making him lose an entire turn, it's kind of a pushover and not really much to talk about here. He was one of the lesser fights in the Interdimensional Rift, to be completely honest. When you defeat him, it allows you to continue through the rift, and you never hear from him again. He's really a second thought here. And going over the 14, you'll find out that though his moves are a little bit different, he's not even a boss. You encounter him as another enemy in the dungeon. We return to the Gubal library in Final Fantasy XIV to find a tome for a mysterious client, which has us go to the tower of the library. And on our way to the final boss, we come across a Panda here. Now, just like his appearance in 5, he stands within the pages of a book and attacks the party. He uses a move called Magic Hammer, where if you're hit by it, you will not only lose MP, but also health. The fight itself is pretty simple. He'll continue to do this roar that gives you a vulnerability stack that will make you take more and more damage. But unlike Biblios, he really doesn't have any mechanics to save him from just being plowed through and gone to the next fight. Now, this isn't the only time a Panda shows up in Final Fantasy XIV. He actually does show up later on. Let's just say he's a lot more difficult there, because not only are you fighting him, but you're also fighting Halicarnassus at the same time. And that's the conclusion of the Gubal Library, or in 5, the Library of the Ancients. It's a pretty cool location. You can definitely tell that they put some love into this dungeon, and I'm glad that they give us 2 versions of it in 14 that we can enjoy. I don't think I've met anybody who dislikes the dungeon. It has good music, has nice fun fights, and overall it's just a nice aesthetic of an area. I mean, who doesn't want to go through a library beating up possessed books? I'm pretty sure I had some fever dreams about that when I was a kid. But this is only one of the comparison videos, and I plan on making more, so please look forward to it. And once we're done with 5, I'll probably go either to 3, 4, or 6. But thanks for watching, and ciao.